Let's see how much this can take. Hi, Shanna Rowe Jackson here from Canson Plein, and today I am going to be trying out the Mixed Media Artboards by Canson. And what this is it's basically a pad of these nice sturdy boards, and it's got kind of a smooth texture to it. And I have my piece divided into 4 different quadrants, and actually I think I'm going to do this on a second piece too, because I want to try out a bunch of different art media on this. I am somebody who works with a lot of different materials, and so I want to see which materials will work best on this for me so that I can see what I'm going to use it for. So for this one, I am going to do Inktense colored pencil, oil pastel, and the Neocolor wax crayons, both of them, just to try out each thing. And then on the next one, I am also going to divide it into 4 and do watercolor, gouache, acrylic, and marker. And so that's my plan, because I want to see what I can use on this board and how much it can take, and I figured I'd bring you along for the ride so that you can see as well, in case you're curious about buying this particular product. And I bought this myself at an art store. This is not sponsored by Canson in any way, or any of the other materials that I will be using today. None of the other companies are involved. Alright, so let's get started. I think I am going to start with colored pencil, because that is a medium I use a lot. And obviously I'm going to see if I can use this for colored pencil, because this is some sturdy stuff. I'm super excited about it. Alright. Let's go. Okay, so starting off with a colored pencil, I am starting out by doing a preliminary outline with a Pilot Color Eno. It is like a little colored mechanical pencil. I love them. They come in a bunch of different colors and they're so fun. But anyway, I actually drew directly on the drawing surface this time, which I rarely ever do when I'm doing any sort of finished piece, because I wanted to see how easily I could correct mistakes and how easy it was to erase on this particular board. And it erased really well. And the mechanical pencil itself isn't too hard to erase, so I will be trying more erasing and correcting, obviously, as I go on with this piece. But I just wanted to mention that normally I do not freehand directly on my drawing surface. I sketch on something else and transfer it, because I don't want to mess up my drawing surface before I really get the chance to render things. But in this case, because I wanted to try how strong this surface was, I went right in and freehanded. And something else, I originally was going to do 4 different little pieces, but I decided to make it one big piece, because each of these supplies kind of has the same end result, or they have the capacity to have the same end result, because they're very similar. And I usually use colored pencil with the rest of the supplies that I'm going to be using here. So I thought it would be good to start off with colored pencil and then to try the rest of the supplies and see how well colored pencil works with them on this surface as well, because that's how I typically work with each of these supplies. And so that's what you're going to see in the future. I should also mention that this is only part 1 of this, because once I started working on this, I realized it's going to take a little bit longer than I anticipated. And so there will be a second video where I show you how well this surface does with acrylic, gouache, and other wet media like watercolor and marker. So that will be coming up probably next week. So let's get talking about this surface again. This is a rigid artboard, textured and erasable wet and dry media is what it says on there. It's part of their Plein Air series. They also have a watercolor one, a canvas one, and I think there's one other one, and I can't remember the name of it, but I will link them in the description below, along with the rest of the supplies that I am using. It's essentially a nice, strong, like matte board surface, and I almost feel like they're a little bit thicker than some of the matte boards that I have used. It doesn't have a weight on it that I can see, but they are thick. They are very thick, kind of about the same thickness as the backboard that is on a regular sketchbook, maybe even a little thicker than some of the cheaper ones. So it's definitely very sturdy and very rigid. And it does have a very slight texture, which is nice because you need to have at least a little bit of tooth to grip certain mediums. I was worried that even with that little texture, it'd be too smooth for colored pencil. And because like there's been times in the past when I have used colored pencil on a mixed media surface that was too smooth and I couldn't get the saturation the way I wanted to, but I was really pleasantly surprised with this. The one thing about the texture though is that it can be a little bit noticeable when trying to blend. And so you can kind of see in that leaf that's not quite finished yet how it was, you can see the texture kind of showing through. And so I had to keep that in mind when I was shading and things like that. I tried to go with the texture because the texture seemed to go vertically down the page. And so I tried to go with the texture and blend out. But that being said, there are times when I'm being exceptionally messy with this because, again, I wanted to see how much it would take. So you are also seeing me blend with odorless mineral spirits because I want to see how well it took odorless mineral spirits. You'll see me blend with that in a water brush at times. And then other times you might see me come in on this segment with just a regular paintbrush. And in those cases, I am blending with the Melts Colored Pencil Blender by Holbein because I wanted to see how well those did on this surface as well. Both of those blending mediums did very well. And of course, later on in the video, you will see me use a brush with just regular water when I start working with the Neocolor 2s, but that is later on. But I am actually very happy with the way this came out. I was really concerned because sometimes you cannot get a lot of layers of colored pencil on smooth surfaces. And I've wanted something really strong to work on with colored pencil for a long time. So I was really excited with the way that I was able to layer on this. Because that's the main thing with colored pencil. You want to be able to layer. And then also for details, I came through and I imprinted with a stylus pen, and that worked really well on this paper. That's how I was able to get the veins in the leaves. And now you are seeing me come in here and there with a craft knife to scratch out some details. It worked beautifully. I was able to scratch out a lot without damaging the paper, and I found that to be very exciting. And something else I should mention too is I am using a huge variety of colored pencils here. Everything from wax to oil-based. I am using Polychromos, Prismacolor, Holbein, Derwent Lightfast, Luminance, you name it, and they've all done really well on this surface. Okay, so I finished the part that was just colored pencil, and I am so excited so far. I'm really liking the amount of layers I was able to get. I was worried that it would be too smooth, but yeah, so I'm super excited. Now I'm going to move on to the oil pastel, and this is going to be interesting because oil pastel, this is the one I'm like the most worried about, so I kind of want to get it done and out of the way. I usually use oil pastel on sanded paper, so it's going to be interesting to see if I can get the amount of layers that I like to get, and also I usually use colored pencil on top of oil pastel, so I'll be testing that here as well to see if I can add the details and layer colored pencil on top of the oil pastel on this surface as well. So that's what I'm going to get ready to do. Okay, so here we go. Round 2, oil pastel. Now, this is one of the things that I was the most worried about. I didn't have a whole lot of faith in the way this was going to work. Oil pastels in general will write on pretty much any surface. And that's not necessarily the issue here. The issue here is going to be layering and getting the amount of layers I like, the type of blending I like, and just basically being able to layer colored pencils on top of it, since that's how I normally work with oil pastel. So it really has more to do with how I work and not necessarily how oil pastels are in general. Now, I should mention I am using the Van Gogh oil pastels, and when I work with oil pastels, I'm not somebody who puts fixative in between layers. That might have helped in this situation, but since that's not how I like to work and the way I usually work doesn't need fixative, I'm not using it here either. For things like expressive strokes and things like that, obviously oil pastels will go down pretty much on any surface. This one, I did have difficulty getting some blending done. My usual ways of blending weren't working out as well, and as you can see, it left a lot of blotchiness. Instead of blending everything together, it just kind of left these blobby little strokes there. That being said, it definitely worked better than I was expecting. I am just spoiled though, because I normally do my oil pastel drawings on sanded paper, specifically Luxe Archival sanded paper, which is a really, really great sanded paper. And so I definitely have my specific way that I like to work with oil pastels. That being said, does this surface take oil pastel? Yes, it does. I was able to come through with a colored pencil. I had to be careful because if I put too much pressure on the colored pencil, then it would scrape the oil pastel off, which it has the capacity to do that on sanded paper as well, but it was definitely more easy to scrape off the oil pastel from this surface than from sanded paper, which could be a plus or a negative depending on which way you're looking at it and how you like to work. But I did have a lot of fun with it, and it was quicker to do than the colored pencil side once I started to get the hang of it. It was more or less me trying to find my working routine on this surface since I'm just so used to a different surface. And I was able to kind of blend it in with the colored pencil side to make it a little bit more seamless, which again, I hadn't planned on having to do that until I started really sketching things out, and then I decided to just do one whole piece with it. And so it's going to be interesting anyways to get it to look like a cohesive piece. Not that that's necessarily the goal. The goal is to try out the paper so it doesn't have to be perfectly cohesive, but I'm a perfectionist, so we'll see how this goes. But yeah, you're seeing me come through now. Like, I'm going back and forth between the colored pencil and the oil pastel. And if I had done this whole piece with just oil pastel, I probably would have been pretty happy with it. But having it be right next to the colored pencil side for comparison is where I kind of had a little bit of a tough time with it, just because it was not blending out as smoothly as I was able to get the colored pencil to blend out. And that was with multiple layers of oil pastel. It would just kind of get globbed up in some places. But that's okay. That's what we're here to discover. If I decide to do like a true mixed media piece, I may bring in some oil pastel on this surface in the future. But I think for when I'm doing my main oil pastel pieces, I will stick to my Luxe Archival sanded paper. That being said, this paper is really incredible. It really is an incredible surface, and it does take a beating. It took a lot of layers. It took a lot of blending. It took a lot of scraping. It took a lot of OMS, which I don't usually have to use a lot of odorless mineral spirits when I'm blending out oil pastel on sanded paper. They usually blend very easily with my little blending wands that you see. They kind of look like these little makeup wands. That's what I usually use. When I did that on this surface, it lifted it a lot. But yeah, so it worked. Not the way I necessarily work, but it worked. Okay, so I just finished the oil pastel part. My initial thoughts, obviously the paper doesn't take as many layers of oil pastel, but it definitely takes more layers than I thought. I still think sanded paper is going to be my go-to for oil pastels, but I'm really happy considering the fact that this is such a smooth surface. I didn't think it would take as many layers as it did. So that's where we're at right now. I think I'm going to move on to the Neocolors next. That's going to be down in this corner, and we're just going to keep on keeping on with this little adventure of ours. Okay, so here we go. I was not quite sure what I should expect from this medium on this surface. The main things that I was looking for was to see if the surface could handle water, because the Neocolor 2s and the Aqua Sticks are both water soluble. And I also wanted to see how many layers I could get and the amount of detail I could get by bringing in something like colored pencil or even with just the crayons themselves. And so that's basically what I was looking for when starting this out. And I went in with a thin layer of like a yellow Neocolor, the water-soluble kind, the Neocolor 2, and kind of filled those gaps, bring some warmth into the veins of the leaves and things like that, similar to how I've been working before. And then I'm just coming in and I'm going back and forth. I'm starting mainly with the water soluble ones just to get a feel for those, to see if those work with layering, you know, just watering them down and then layering with just the crayons themselves. And then later on, you're going to see me come in with some of the regular Neocolor 1 wax pastels, which are not water soluble. So there will be times when you see me come in with a water brush to blend. And in that case, that means I am working on a piece that is using the non-water soluble kind, and I am using OMS to blend. So if you see a water brush come in, that's what's going on. If you see a regular brush, then I am blending with water. And I love the Neocolor 1s and the Neocolor 2s equally. I would have to say, obviously, the Neocolor 2s wash out a lot more with water, and they lighten up a lot more with water than the Neocolor 1s do with the OMS. So the Neocolor 1s kind of stay a little bit thicker and tend to be a little bit more vibrant when blended out with OMS, whereas the Neocolor 2s are able to layer a lot more and get thinner washes because they wash out so quickly, which is not a bad thing at all. It's just something to mention. So the surface handled it really, really well. I'm very excited. I was able to blend way more seamlessly with these, even just using the crayons alone, even without water or OMS, than I was with the oil pastel. And so I'm very, very excited about that. This might be my new favorite surface. A lot of people have been telling me to try the Neocolors on a matte board. And of course, this is essentially, it's matte board like. And so I was very, very happy with the way this blended out. And I would say they even blended out more smoothly than the colored pencils. And I also didn't feel the need to bring in colored pencils as much to correct things like I did with the oil pastels. I had to bring in colored pencils a lot more than I normally would with oil pastels because it just was not, they weren't blending out the way I wanted on the surface. I didn't really have to do that here. I did come in because I wanted to see how I could layer colored pencils on top, but for the most part, it wasn't me trying to correct mistakes. So far, this surface is really a win for me and the way I work with the wax pastels. I'm super excited about it. They even blended out really easily with the blending wand that I use, the thing that looks like an eyeshadow applicator. And I usually use that for my oil pastels. That did not work well on this surface with the oil pastels. It worked wonderfully with the wax pastels. So very, very excited about this. I will definitely be trying a full piece with these on this surface in the future. But all in all, I was actually able to get the detail I wanted. It scraped off really well. Even though the water-soluble stuff sinks into the paper a little bit differently, I was still able to scrape out the details to get those kind of water droplets in there. And yeah, so that was exciting as well. The mistakes were easy to correct, and I was able to get the details I wanted through scraping with a craft knife. And the indentation stayed pretty well also, even using the water-soluble media. I have to say the paper, like the surface, took the water really well. It did kind of bend a little bit, and I'll show you that towards the end of the video, but also there wasn't any pilling or anything like that with this medium, and so I'm very excited about that too. Okay, so here is part 3 where I tested out the Neocolor 1, the Neocolor 2, and the Cretacolor Aqua Sticks on here. And just a reminder, I think I mentioned it in the voiceover, the Neocolor 1 is not water soluble, but the Neocolor 2 is, and the Aqua Stick is as well. And they all worked equally well on this surface. I am beyond impressed. I am so excited right now because I think this might be my new favorite surface for this particular art supply. I am super excited. I can't believe the amount of layers I was able to get. I was able to work back and forth between the water-soluble ones and the non-water-soluble ones when I needed to. I was able to blend with water very well, and the paper took it like a champ. I was able to blend with odorless mineral spirits again, and the paper took it like a champ. So I am very optimistic about this. I am so excited, and I think, like I said, this might be my new favorite surface for the wax pastels. Definitely took the wax pastels better than the oil pastels. Here's what our piece looks like right now. So it's coming along really well, but you can tell that this blended out probably even more so than the colored pencils, and definitely more so than the oil pastel. I am so excited. So up next is Inktense, and yeah, we'll see how it goes. Oh, I'm excited. Okay, folks, we are in the final round of me testing out my dry and semi-dry media on this paper. Oh, I love Inktense. If you watch my channel, you know that I absolutely love Inktense. It's a very versatile medium. I came into this with very, very high hopes. However, my hopes were soon dashed. I am not thrilled with this surface for Inktense. And it's not that Inktense don't go down on it. It does. And the surface handled the moisture really well. Again, it did not pill up. Like some surfaces will pill up and they'll start to shred because water media, like it just can't handle water media. And this is the wettest of the 4 that I am doing right now. And it held up really well to that. I went in like I usually do with my thinner layers. I used the blocks and I used them like they were watercolor pans, and I wet my brush, I lifted the pigment, and I washed it down onto my surface. And then I decided I want to come over it with the pencils. Now, usually when I do this, you have to let the surface dry completely before you come in with pencils, because it's kind of hard to layer the pencils anyways, because it'll kind of dig into any type of surface when you're working with Inktense and when the surface is wet. So you got to be careful of that to begin with. So I did let it dry in between layers. And that being said, I am not all that impressed with the amount of layers I was able to get. I feel like I was able to get more layers with a crayon, which is thick, than I was with this. And it was very surprising to me because I always work with layers. Now, this, I should mention, you know, anything in this video is me talking about my experience and how I work. Everybody works differently. So it may work for you just fine with the way you work. But with the way I work, I like a lot of different layers. And I'm not impressed with the amount of layers I was able to get. Now, I was able to come through and put pencil down and wash it back out and layer it that way, which was really good. However, I had to come in with regular colored pencil for detail, and I couldn't scrape anything out, which the surface I've been able to scrape out on every other media. I'm just not all that impressed. I like the way it takes water, and it did really well that way, but as far as the way I like to layer with these, I'm gonna have to stick to hot press watercolor paper, I think. Okay, so I am gonna call it done. I should say I'm calling it quits. So first I'm going to just talk about the Inktense portion, and then I'll go into my final conclusions. I was very disappointed in this surface as far as Inktense goes. I am pretty experienced with Inktense. I've worked in it quite a lot, and I have my way that I like to work with them, and it generally is light washes, and then I come on top with pencil for detail. And so I started that here. And then also sometimes I like to incorporate colored pencil. And with the melts, you can actually blend colored pencil and Inktense together because it's a water-based colored pencil blender. So that's amazing. And so I did that on here because sometimes I like to do that in my work. And I tried all the different ways that I like to work with it. And really what it comes down to is it just does not take the amount of layers that I like to do when I'm working with Inktense. It does take some layers, and if you're doing light washes and very basic detail, yes, it absolutely works for that. But for me, where I typically like to work in realism, I use a lot of light layers and things like that. I was not able to get the detail that I wanted. If you look, it just does not want to take any more, barely any more in certain areas. It's just not even showing up. And this is a dark color. Some areas it will show up and some it won't. I am able to still get some details on top of it with regular colored pencil, but even then, it's not blending in a way that I like. It starts to lift some of the layers below, and you get these like chunky pieces where it didn't blend out. And Inktense is a very versatile medium, so I have not experienced this kind of frustration with Inktense in a very long time. But that's, you know, for the way I like to work. So personally, I will not be using this surface for Inktense. I did want to show you. The bottom half is the half that I used. I don't know if you're going to be able to see this. The bottom half is the half that I used the semi-matte wet media on, meaning the Neocolors and the Inktense. And it did warp a little bit where the wetter media was. So it's not, the bottom curved up a little. You can see it's not going to want to focus because it's too close, but I'm in my living room, so I can't film the way I would like to. But yeah, so it curved just a little bit, but not bad. It didn't buckle. It held the water pretty well. And that test will be coming next week when I really try the wet media. I'm going to be, you know, really testing this out with the watercolor, the acrylic, the gouache, and markers, water-based markers. So that's going to be very interesting. I don't have the highest hopes for the water-based markers because those are so finicky surface-wise to begin with. But we'll see. But yeah, this was a great experiment. So overall, I love this board for colored pencil and the wax pastels, being the Neocolor ones, the Neocolor 2s, which are their water-soluble, and then the Cretacolor, like, water-soluble crayons that are very similar to the Neocolor 2s. Worked beautifully on this, blended out really well, which is exciting because I've been looking for a good surface for those, and I've been told to try matte board, and this is very similar to matte board. So for colored pencil and Neocolors, I highly recommend it. Not a fan of it for oil pastel. Again, this comes down to the way I like to work. I like to work in a lot of different layers, and this, it didn't layer well. It was scraping up when I tried to put detail down, and it did not blend out well. And I think I mentioned, or maybe I didn't mention, I am using the Van Gogh oil pastels. I love them. They're creamy, buttery. I've never had an issue with them for the way I work. And I'm also very picky about surface. I really love the Luxe Archival Sanded Paper. They blend out like a dream on that paper. I can get the layers I want. It's not shedding after. It sticks right to the paper. And so I'm kind of spoiled when it comes to my oil pastels anyways, because I already have a surface that I absolutely love and gives me everything I need. And this surface just doesn't do that for me. You're going to have your typical lifting still. It was, some of this was on the surface of the back side of the paper that covers the pad, so you can see where the oil pastel was shedding on that, and that's indicative of oil pastel anyways. However, with the sanded paper, it doesn't shed the same way, and it blends out seamlessly, whereas this, it lifts off. It doesn't like blend and smear like you would expect it to if you run your hand across it. Instead, it lifts off the surface. So the surface just does not absorb the oil pastel. Even with using odorless mineral spirits, it doesn't absorb the oil pastel the way I would like it to. And so for those two mediums, I'm not going to be using this surface, I don't think. But for colored pencil, Neocolor, I will definitely be coming back to the surface. I'm very excited to try more finished pieces with these individually. And I will likely stick to my Arches Hot Press watercolor paper for my Inktense and my Luxe Archival Sanded Paper for my oil pastel. And so that's the conclusion that I've come to this week. Also, I wanted to show you, I did take my acid-free pen and I tested it on the back side, and this is acid-free as it claims, so that's very exciting. Very sturdy. It didn't curve as much as other things would have when I added the water, but again, we'll see that next week when I work with the strictly wet media. Okay, so I hope you found this helpful. I'm very excited to continue with my little experimentation and to use these for at least these two media in the future, and yeah. So I will see you next week where I test out the gouache, the watercolor, the water-based markers, and acrylic on this surface. So stay tuned for that. I hope you found this helpful. Thank you so much for watching. You have a great day. Bye. If you found value in this video, please feel free to hit the like button, hit subscribe, and share so others can see it as well. Thank you.